People started? Yes, you have. Brilliant. Good morning to everyone who is joining us. Good morning to some of you. Good evening to some of our others. One of our lovely panelists, you might notice it's quite dark in his room. It's because it's the middle of the night and we're hugely appreciative for his sacrifice in staying up quite so late. We'll start the event properly in a couple of minutes. We're just going to allow all of you to filter in. Just a few housekeeping notes. You will notice that your videos are off and you are muted. Please do chat, talk in the chat and say hello. Introduce yourselves. We love to have comments. We love to have feedback. We also really like to see where everyone is coming from across the world, and it's nice to share. Obviously, not all of you can attend with us in person tomorrow, so the chat is very much an area where you can network with each other and exchange ideas and collaborations, and that's something that we really do want people to do as much as possible online if in person isn't possible. So do share your name, share your details. Welcome everyone in the chat. There will be a Q&A session at the end. If you do have questions, we will try and monitor the chat. My colleague Jasir is adding some messages for you there already, but we'll try and catch those questions and add them into the Q&A. But to make sure that we can add all your questions and address them and ask them to our lovely speakers and gain their insights, please do try and put those questions in the Q&A either during their talks or at the end. Or if you just have a really great idea, drop it in there. Equally, if you just want to say thank you to the speakers and congratulate them on what I am sure will be marvelous talks, please do put that in the chat section so that they can see. Beyond that, just as a reminder to everyone joining us, we will be having certificates. The certificates for attendance will be distributed probably early next week. As you can appreciate, we have over 1,000 delegates joining us in person and online, and filtering through all those names and removing duplications will take us a little while. So do please be patient. You will get a certificate if you're joining us, I do promise, but just give us a bit of time for that. And we will also be providing translations of all of these recordings. Again, that will take a bit of time for the translation team to add those additional translations to the videos as subtitles, but at some point over the next month or so, we hope to have not only all the videos of all of the events, all of the sessions happening on our website, but also the translations as well in either Arabic or English, depending on the language of the speakers for that session. General Zoom features. I'm sure many of you are hopefully fairly familiar with Zoom by now. You can move the windows around. If there is a problem, please do raise your hand or flag it in the chat, and Jasir will try and facilitate and help you. And as I said, please do use the Q&A for those content questions. So I think that's all the housekeeping, and we are ready to get started. This is the second session and the third panel for this year's 4th Annual Forum for Open Research in MENA. This year's theme, as all of you know, is Becoming Open, Building Capacities and Communities in the Arab World. I'm Emily Chanowski. I am the founder and director of Forum, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome all of you here today and to welcome our lovely speakers who I'll introduce shortly. This panel in particular was one I personally was very excited about. It's predominantly about the hidden costs of openness, which is something we don't always talk about, and it's something we don't always investigate as thoroughly. I think people kind of sheer away from talking about those hidden costs sometimes and often assume someone else will pay them, so therefore it's not their problem. But here today we have two people who are going to talk specifically about those topics, and they are representatives of some of the major foundational cornerstone infrastructures and funding organizations that we rely on for open research and open science everywhere in the world. There was a slight panel change. So one of our speakers, we had to rearrange as one of our speakers needed a different slot. So our third presentation from Dr. Salwan is on a slightly different topic, but incredibly exciting and something I'm really looking forward to, and I hope you are too, which is all about open science in Iraq after the conflict. So not entirely aligned, but I think we'll still end up talking about costs quite a lot. Anyway, so without further ado, it is time for me to introduce our first speaker, who is Sarah Lippincott. She is a librarian and researcher with over a decade of experience working with open access and open science in general. And she is currently with us today as senior researcher at the Invest in Open Infrastructure organization, which is what she's going to talk about today, with her paper, The Cost of Public Access. Do we get what we pay for? So, Sarah, I will pass over to you and turn off my camera. And just a reminder to everyone, please do add any questions for this talk into the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Emily. I'm going to go ahead and...
Yes, do share your screen. Sorry, I should have mentioned that.
No problem. All right.
Perfect.
All right.
Good to go.
That's great. Thank you so much to everyone for joining today. My name is Sarah Liebencut, and as Emily said, I'm a senior researcher with Invest in Open Infrastructure, or IOI. Today, I'm going to share highlights from our State of Open Infrastructure 2025 report. This year's report looked closely at the real costs, financial, cultural, and political, of implementing public access policies around the world. We'll look at what's working, where the biggest challenges are, and how funders and institutions can make smart, sustainable investments that truly support open science. Over the past 2 decades, many governments have adopted policies promising free and immediate access to taxpayer-funded research. These policies have wide support, and they aim to make science more transparent, equitable, and collaborative. But there's a major tension here. These mandates alone by themselves don't make openness sustainable, and they don't make openness the default. Our key question at IOI was, who pays to make public access possible? And what happens when those costs aren't covered by the same governments and funders that create the mandates? Take the US Nelson Memo as an example. It requires public access to federally funded research, but provides very little guidance on how to achieve that access or on which costs federal grants will actually support. Our findings in this research project draw from interviews with stakeholders in North America, Latin America, and Europe, and a National Science Foundation funded study of how universities manage compliance workflows and what it truly costs to make research open. Together, these sources offer a view of how public access policies translate or fail to translate into operational reality in the regions that we studied. During our research, 3 key questions emerged. What costs are undermining public access as a lever for change? What are the costs that actually create barriers to making public access a reality? Can mandates really foster open science, or do they risk reinforcing the status quo and current inequities? Where should funders and institutions target investment to turn policy momentum into lasting impact? Across all the regions that we studied, we found a consistent story. The hidden costs of openness are real and often underestimated, and can pose serious barriers to creating genuine, sustained changes in research practice. Our research surfaced a range of hidden costs related to making publicly funded research publicly available, and I'll get deeper into a number of those costs over the course of this presentation. A major one is the need for well-supported research infrastructure, and I think we'll hear more about that in the other presentations or in John's presentation. In the United States, as well as Europe and Latin America, we saw that abrupt policy shifts and political uncertainty are making it difficult for institutions to plan their response to public access policies, even in the near term. The ground is shifting under their feet, and tightening budgets are making it difficult to justify expenditures on human and technical infrastructure that could end up being unnecessary if these policies end up changing significantly or not being implemented due to political instability. One of the strongest findings from our report is this: public access policies do little to address broad participation in knowledge creation and in the systems of knowledge distribution. They focus primarily on the right to consume or to access the products of federally funded or government funded research. In other words, the ability to read an article doesn't automatically mean the ability to contribute to research or infrastructure. To achieve that, we need systems, labor, and capacity that support participation in knowledge creation and scholarly communication. So I want to take a closer look at some of these hidden or underfunded or unfunded costs of public access. Let's start with infrastructure. Public access, so that is, the public availability of federally funded research outputs depends on a wide range of behind-the-scenes systems like repositories, publishing platforms, persistent identifiers, preservation services, and others. These don't just appear on their own, as I'm sure many of you in this room know. They require staff time, they require technical maintenance and coordination. Many are underfunded, relying on one-time grants, on volunteer labor, running on very slim margins. And without sustained investment, the infrastructure that supports public access remains fragile, threatening long-term reliability and trust in the system, and preventing broad-scale buy-in from researchers. Infrastructure is one part of the story. As several of the experts that we talked to told us, there's also the major cost of culture change. Jennifer Gibson from Dryad, the data publishing platform, put it really well when she said that mandates alone can't shift behavior. They have to be backed by training, awareness, and aligned incentives to encourage researchers to actually participate and move beyond simple compliance into actually participating in a more open and transparent research system. Eunice Mercado Lara, who helped design Mexico's national public access policy, emphasized to us that effective change follows a clear sequence or formula that starts with raising awareness among researchers of the importance of the policies, of the existence of the policies, and of the mechanisms for complying with policies, then building skills and infrastructure, and then actually introducing those mandates and incentives. Skipping the foundational steps of awareness, skill building, and infrastructure building risks leading to frustration, compliance fatigue, and issues with compliance rather than genuine engagement with open science. Equity emerged as another major theme in our research. Many policies equate equity with access. If everyone can read research, that's considered progress. But access to read is not the same as access to contribute. Barriers like language, high publication fees, and lack of local infrastructure still exclude large parts of the world. Even within the US, disparities in institutional funding can affect who can afford to publish openly. If we want equity to be more than just a slogan in open science and public access, we need investment in multilingual publishing, in inclusive governance, and investment in local or regional capacity that is aligned with local and regional needs and practices so that participation in open science is possible for all. And I'll just go re-emphasize this major finding from our report that the public access policies that we looked at and the opinions of the experts that we talked to showed us that public access policies, as they're currently written in the regions that we studied, do little to address broad participation in knowledge creation and instead focus on the right to consume, leaving a major gap in our progress towards a more open and transparent research ecosystem. The cost of publishing is very much tied in and related to the cost of equity, and those barriers to broad and equitable participation in the research ecosystem. When open access relies on article processing charges, the costs shift from pay to read to pay to publish. And while this may help readers around the world access content that they or their institutions couldn't previously afford, it may still exclude them from publishing in high impact journals that often have high publishing costs. Increased investment in diamond open access models, as well as transparency in APC costs, are essential if we want open access to be equitable and sustainable. Another challenge is the cost of compliance itself, tracking article deposits, verifying embargoes, preparing reports. all of those steps require new workflows and staff, both at universities and at funding agencies. And um, uh, and that's often not counted in terms of what we think of when we think of the costs of making things open. And as I mentioned, political instability is making planning harder. So policies are changing, priorities are shifting, and institutions are really hesitating to invest in technical systems and human labor and workflows that might become obsolete. The result of this is a patchwork of compliance efforts. We saw this in the institutions we worked with in our project to examine institutional workflows around public access policies. And so we have a patchwork of these compliance efforts that are absorbing resources without necessarily improving access or improving uh, our progress toward open science as the default. Despite these challenges, there are clear opportunities that emerged from our research. Funders and institutions can invest in shared open infrastructure. We really believe at Invest in Open Infrastructure at IOI that open infrastructure for open access is the gold standard. Both government funders and private funders can help to make open science the default, make it the norm, and make it sustainable by not just covering article processing charges as part of their allowable costs when they're encouraging or requiring public access to the research they fund, but by actually funding the platforms and the systems, the infrastructure that makes that possible. And again, that includes the full range of infrastructure components that we need, the repositories, the open publishing systems and Diamond open access publishing models, the persistent identifiers, the preservation, the full range of open infrastructure that's required to support the life cycle, the research life cycle. Governments, private funders, institutions can be investing in training, in support for researchers on open science practices, helping again to build on the momentum that these policies can create to not just kind of hammer the importance of compliance, but to actually change research practices, to use this as an opportunity to promote open science as a default, as an institutional expectation, and something that the institution provides support for, and not something that just is the burden and the responsibility of an individual researcher. And institutions and funders can also emphasize the importance of research assessment reform to align incentives with the practices that we want to see. And finally, supporting cross-regional collaboration so that policy design reflects diverse realities. There are different needs, different realities, different practices across the world that demand different responses, different approaches to making open science the norm. And a one size fits all will not work in this context. These steps don't just make compliance easier. So these kind of opportunities are not just about making compliance about enforcing compliance or ensuring public access. They're creating a healthier and more efficient research ecosystem. And the goal here, one of the major goals here, I think, is to reduce friction for researchers by integrating open practices into their daily workflows, making it easy, making it natural, instead of treating openness as an extra administrative burden that takes away from the core research that they want to be doing. And this point always really reminds me of Brian Nosek's model from the Center for Open Science, which I think is really apt to these discussions. We need this layered approach is really essential, making it possible to make research open by providing robust, well-supported infrastructure, making it easy through a layer of user interface and user experience design that integrates this into the researcher's workflow and into their practices. Making it normative. This is, ensuring that research communities appreciate and participate in public access, in making their research open as something that is expected by their colleagues in their discipline, their peers. making it rewarding. This is, again, going back to investing in research assessment reform and making it not just an expectation of your funder, but of your institution, your department, that openness is valued in how you are evaluated as a scholar. And finally, after all of these layers are put into place, that policy is really just the tippy top of that pyramid, where all of these things are lining up to make it possible to comply and make it rewarding to comply. So in short, public access policies create momentum, but they don't ensure openness. To realize their promise, we need to invest not only in access to read, but in capacity to contribute, in the people, infrastructure, and systems that make open research work. And that means funding all of those things, the people, the infrastructure, and the processes that make open research possible. As I close, I'd like to invite you to reflect on your own context, and I'd be really fascinated to hear from those of you in regions that were not part of our research in this project. What do public access policies look like in your region or country? Are these policies creating meaningful change in research practice, participation, and the acceleration of science? And what kinds of funding, infrastructure, and programs are in place to make those policies successful? So I'll really look forward to hearing your questions and comments from your regional perspectives and how they may differ from what we found in the US, Europe, and Latin America. Thank you again for taking the time for your time and your attention. I hope these insights help you see public access not just as a compliance exercise, but as an opportunity to invest in the infrastructure and culture change that make open research sustainable. You can find the full State of Open Infrastructure report and additional resources at the link on the slide. And I look forward to your questions and discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. That was brilliant. I was frantically making notes because there's so much there. It was a very, very rich talk. So thank you hugely. So the format, for those of you who are familiar with past events, is we'll have all three panelists first, and then we'll have the Q&A session at the end, because the hope is to have that more engaged Q&A with the I'm hoping that the panelists will also have questions for each other and discuss and everything else. So if you do have questions for Sarah, please do pop them in the Q&A now in case you forget them later, and we'll read them out shortly. But now it is my huge pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. John Walensky. He is professor at Simon Fraser University and professor emeritus at the Kostler Professor Emeritus, sorry, at Stanford University. His latest book, which came out in 2023, was about science and copyright. So if that's something that's of interest to you, I do advise you go and read it. And crucially for today's talk, he is also the founder of the Public Knowledge Project, PKP, which many of you will know is the developer and owner for the open journal systems, without which I would think it's fair to say a significant proportion of the world's content would not be produced in the format it is today. So we're very excited to hear this presentation. And his title today is PKP Doesn't Just Believe in Open, it builds it, and now it needs your support. So John, I will pass over to you. And also, as I said, for everyone who was joining before, we have to say an extra special thank you to John, because it is almost 1 a.m. for him. So we are doubly appreciative that he wanted to join us and was willing to join us at what is a rather unfortunate hour of the evening. So John, I will turn off my video and hand over to you.
Okay. Let me just get to the top of my talk. Thank you so much, Sarah and Emily, sorry. But Sarah, I want to thank you for setting up a beautiful overview and the kind of structure that we're going to provide examples for, instances of. So I'm, oops, sorry, just get organized here. We're going to talk about the infrastructure and the hidden costs for the Public Knowledge Project, and I want to give you just a little bit of background on it. Oops, sorry. Now I get it. So this is the Public Knowledge Project is at Simon Fraser University in Canada, in Vancouver, essentially. That's the SFU. The PKP is something that I happen to have started in 1998, about 27 years ago. I am a professor of education. I think this is an important aspect to consider for a moment. I'm a school teacher by trade. and I have been a professor of education for about 40 years. And in that time, I've been very interested in public access to knowledge. The internet seemed in 1998 to be the very promise of public libraries on everyone's computer. And I got excited about the possibility of research being shared. In fact, I was a little bit surprised in 1998 to discover that the research was not going to be shared from the libraries with the public, that in fact they signed contracts that with the publishers that ensured the libraries weren't sharing electronic copies of their work, and that the public had to show up at the library. And so that was kind of an inspiration for me as an educator to think about how could we make this knowledge and research publicly available. And today we can say that open access is a common concept, and we're now considering some of the hidden costs. I think in my case, I'm going to present to you not so much the hidden costs, but the costs that we are probably not familiar with. We've done a lot to try to make this public. So let's call it the unrealized costs of open infrastructure in particular. And we see this project as very much in the spirit of Sarah's presentation of an open infrastructure instance. We're building platforms. So there are 3 platforms that we have developed: Open Journal Systems and Open Monograph Press and Open Preprint Systems. In each of these cases, we are providing a platform that means you can take a submission, you can put it through peer review, you should put it through peer review, an editing process, and then ultimately publishing it. So we combine the submission system and the publishing system, which makes it available for indexing. I'll talk a little more about indexing later, but that is part of this whole picture. So we are the infrastructure from the submission stage through the review and editing stage to the publication stage. And the software that we have developed, and I'll give you a little more background on it as we go, but essentially is open source software. That means it's free to download and install locally. And this is going to be an important concept for us and a very important decision that we made very early, not to have a central system, which you might think of as this Google search is a centralized system. Ours is a distributed platform that operates locally. And as I say, I'll give you some examples. We do journals, and the monograph came a little later when I realized that in fact books were being left behind in this whole digital era, and that they needed the same kind of editorial support, submission systems. And then of course the preprints came onto the scene with a huge boost during the pandemic when we realized we needed science much more quickly. And we were developing, in fact, the preprint systems at the beginning, at the very outset of the pandemic. And our most successful instance to date is in Cielo, where it was used quite a bit, and then subsequently in Japan. J-Archive is quite popular as well. So that forms the start. In terms of the use of the journal system, we started at 0, and I remember that period very well when we had no journals using OJS. But since then, it's been quite successful. And you can say, I think in terms of the hidden costs, the fact that it is free. But that's the last thing that's free. And I'll talk more about the costs behind it. But Open Journal Systems, as an open source software, is a free publishing platform that is available online to download. So we have had tremendous growth. There are 55,000 journals in 2024, active journals using it. The distribution, as you can see, is global. There are 150 countries in which they have at least one instance of an active journal. This map doesn't quite do a very accurate job. It's kind of at the low end. At any rate, it's not the best of representations. Because it makes Russia and the US and India and Indonesia all look equal, but they're not. And I'll show you some numbers more particularly. But I want you to give you a sense that the success of open source software is so vital for the costs and the operation of open science. And if you want to think about it in terms of how this economy is going to operate, the basic point is the distribution of costs. And I'll talk about that. But the open source is a matter of distributed costs. A good example is translation. There are journals publishing in 60 languages using OJS. And OJS is itself available in 30, 35 languages, not all completely up to date because they're all done by volunteers. It's a distributed aspect of open source. Anyone can contribute to the code, and everyone can use the code, and they can use it for whatever purpose. That is, there are journals that charge subscriptions, charge APCs, but the vast majority, about 80%, are diamond journals that don't charge readers and don't charge authors. But again, open source doesn't dictate the economic model. Open source is itself an economic model for the distribution of the software, which is an important aspect to consider. Now, in terms of more local use, in terms of the MENA or Middle East and North Africa situation, here we have the distribution of active journals in 2024. And I'll be talking a bit more about Morocco, which is one of the strongest instances, but Iraq was one of the earliest adopters of OJS. In terms of languages, Arabic is about 180. I don't have an accurate figure at this point for 2024, but it was in the area of 180 to 200 of these journals, these 900 journals, are publishing in Arabic. And the translation of OJS into Arabic is a contribution from this community, and is current for the 2024. There's a current version in Arabic that is available. The distribution covers all of the disciplines. I think it's another important aspect before I get to the cost to understand that this goes across the curriculum, or you might say across the disciplines. Iraq, just to go back to this early instance, was first involved with medical publishing. So the medical journals of Iraq were some of the earliest users, and I think that we have about 15% of our journals using OJS for health sciences. We have a similar proportion in education. We have the STEM fields well represented as well, and the humanities are even stronger. Humanities and social sciences are more like 20 or 30% of the journals. So it is across the board. But I'm not giving you the hidden cost yet. I'm just setting up the stage for getting to those. If you can bear with me. Oh, now, there we go. Oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way all of a sudden. Sorry. Excuse me. All of a sudden, I've lost my control, of course. Okay, I'm back. All right, so I want to give an example of how it operates, and I want to start thinking, helping you think about the community support in terms of an archipelago. One of our largest users is Indonesia, and it's really taught us a lot about the notion of an archipelago in terms of the independence of the islands. Indonesia is a country of islands, 17,000. They are using about 24, it says here, as it says, 24,000 journals. That's almost half of the journals using OJS. And they have built it into their government infrastructure. And this is a very important aspect of how these costs are shared. So we provide the free software, but Indonesia has provided the incentive, the motivation, which is not a hidden cost, but is part of the economics of it, by insisting that students have the experience of publishing research. Every student who receives a degree in higher education, an advanced degree, a first degree, and graduate degree, must publish an article, must have that experience of doing original research and sending it through a peer review process. And so that has led to a great increase in the number of journals. It means the institutions then, that is the libraries of the universities and colleges of Indonesia, are bearing the costs. And those costs are, I mean, the software is free, but those costs include the technical support, the upgrading every year and with a new version of OJS. They call for the support of answering questions and providing technical help. So this notion of a locally distributed infrastructure cost is a very important aspect. And if there are 24,000 journals in Indonesia, we would think there are thousands of these libraries or universities or departments that are bearing the cost as part of their operations. And we provide no additional support other than the software itself. So these are all born locally, but I'll talk more about how we fund the research. Sorry, how we do fund the research on the software, but how we fund the software itself. Let me see if I can do better with the slides. There we go. So just a little bit more about this model of the archipelago. What attracts us about this metaphor and geographic reality is the notion of the distribution, of the independence of the islands, of the archipelago, and the autonomy and the diversity. In languages, again, I mentioned the 60 languages. So we think that this distributed model allows for a local autonomy and a local bearing of costs and distribution of those. So in the majority, as it were, the cost of publishing on open access is borne locally and is distributed so that no one is bearing all that much. And the infrastructure, which is our responsibility, that is the Public Knowledge Project, is a separately financed aspect. That is, we are funding it separately and centrally, but with support from the community. So this gets a little complicated. Many of the organizations that use our software are also supporting its development. Because even though it's open source and free, the software is, well, let me explain a little bit more about that part. But let me finish with the archipelago. A very inspiring figure, Edouard Glissant, a Marnician writer, talks about it as the archipelagic thinking en français, and really makes a very strong defense of how it allows for connection and relationship and autonomy and independence. So the diversity and difference among us can be maintained. And we find that to be a very powerful metaphor in thinking about this. And that applies as much to the economy, that is, that distribution and independence, as it does to the thinking about the preservation of languages, the differences in cultures, the representation of local initiatives and local research as being an important aspect. But let me talk a bit more about the particular, let me shift to the PKP model. So how do we fund PKP, and what is PKP in terms of an organization? This is Simon Fraser University, an interesting architectural building and outfit. And it's a perfect cloudy day in Vancouver, as you can see, and kind of suitable to to what we are going into in the seasons in Vancouver at this point, although I'm based in San Francisco, as it turns out. So Simon Fraser is the economic and the institutional home of the Public Knowledge Project. And insofar as it provides the support of the institution, I think that's another aspect of a hidden cost, in the sense that Simon Fraser University is our home and adds nothing to the cost. In fact, it provides support. It has the heat and lights, but we are a distributed community. The Public Knowledge Project consists of 40 to 45 people working full-time on the software development, on the community support, and on the research. And it brings in, to fund those people and to fund the software and the equipment that we need, 3 to 4 million Canadian dollars. And if US is kind of the standard, that would be more like 2 to 3 million US dollars across 40 to 45 people. And so how do we fund that money? Where's the hidden costs or the unrealized costs? And I would start with our development partners. So we have a whole range of different groups that work with us. The software is, as I say, distributed, but so is the development of it. These are organizations in Europe, in Latin America, and in Canada. And they are, each of them is a partner at a level that means that they are helping us to develop the software. Cielo was a developer, for example, on the preprint server, and worked with us every step of the way. TIB in Germany is working on metadata and on Diamond Journal support. And University of Alberta has been a very, very strong partner in developing OJS and the journals. So this idea of having partners who want a bigger say, and this creates a community support for it, but it also is a financial commitment. And these partners, and there's only 7 right now, these partners all put in financial support in the area of 25,000 Canadian dollars or more, but they also put in time and developer time and technical support. And that's a crucial aspect. We're releasing OJS on an ongoing basis with improvements in security and development and capacity for publishing all of the time. We have just released 3.5, which may not mean much to you, but it means that 3.5 would be 3 major releases, and we're halfway through, as it were, the 3rd major release. But every year we do 3.6 will be coming next year, and on it goes from there. So it is a major technical development. And what you get from that is you have a system that is comparable to any commercial system, a system that is secure technically, and advanced in terms of your own support and ability to use it. Let me continue. Another aspect of the community model that we have is to have partnerships with on a financial basis. So these are consortia and groups of all of the Australian libraries is a really good example. The Finnish universities are the universities of Finland. I'm going to share with you just one example with the community sprint has been very important. So the sprint is a gathering we have once or twice a year, where people are supported by their institutions to come in. I wish I could recognize which this one. This might be the one in Finland. They're held all over the world, and people come together for 2 days at the expense of their institution to develop the software. For 2 days, they work on particular projects. They finish some of them, but many of them are continued after they leave. It's a very intense time. It's a very quiet time. Everyone's working on their computers, with a bit of conferencing in between, and a very strong community building. And so again, it's the community input for the shared outcome. We also have institutional members. These are universities and university libraries in particular. We have 91 around the world. They start at $500 and go up from there. And so all of that adds up to a fair bit, but I want to give you 2 more examples of how we fund. So the community is about 1/3 of our funding. So that represents roughly $1 million Canadian, in terms of our support from that community. But we need 3 to 4 million to really manage the team and produce software and to conduct the research and to provide community support. So the rest of our support comes from 2 areas. The strongest of those is a hosting service that we provide for about 1,000 journals. That is 55,000 journals use OJS. And of those 55,000, 1,000, for one reason or another, pay us to be the host, to do the upgrades, to provide the technical support in a more intense way, if you like. And so that hosting service, which at first I really wondered about because it centralizes, the hosting is done on our servers and our support is provided by our team. But it's provided a financial support that is helping everyone. So everything we do for our clients, our hosting clients, is open source software development that goes to the whole community. So it has a double value. It funds technical developments, and it provides software for the advantage of everyone. So that's the second. The first, again, is the membership that you're seeing here. The second is our hosting service. The third are grants, research grants, and government grants. We have money from the Gates Foundation. We have money from the Canadian, what's called the Tri-Agency, from the Research Funding Agencies of Canada, in terms of their support. And we have had grants from the MacArthur and a great number of other organizations. And so we are very active in our research, and I'll do a little bit of that at the end. 1
Just
minute?
a couple of minutes. Yeah, I was going to say it's
Yes,
sort of
okay. So
overrunning a
let me,
little. So
okay, I'm sorry. So let me just quickly show one more hidden cost. So this is the platform for Morocco of journals. They have about 250. And there, the Moroccan government is bearing the cost of hosting these journals for the entire country. So just another way that countries can begin to organize. There are those who are not using OJS yet, and the country model is a very important and popular one. I'll just close off by talking a bit about, in fact, I'll close off very quickly. I just want to talk about the research that we do, that we develop. One of the ones I would like to mention is the publication facts label. So we're looking at research integrity, and we have collected the money from a private donor to Stanford University to develop a publication facts label that will be available to all journals using OJS 3.3 and later versions. As another example of how we gather resources, and they are the hidden costs, to increase particular aspects. So let me leave it at that, Emily, and thank you very much to everyone for your attention.
thank you, John. That was brilliant. And as a heavy OJS user myself, it's really interesting to see get some more insight into the funding model. And I particularly like the idea, that image of community support as a sort of archipelago of independent investors and locally distributed infrastructure costs. It's a really, really nice and very helpful way of thinking about it. So now we are supposed to have our third panelist. Mira and Jesse, is Dr. Salwan online? For those of you who are just joining us, there have been some internet connectivity issues with Iraq. Mira?
No, unfortunately, he's not online at the moment.
Okay, well, in that case, I'm hoping he will join us. And Mira, please do keep an eye out and let me know if he is able to log on. For those of you who weren't able or will not be able to potentially hear his presentation on the development of open science in Iraq after conflict and the sort of costs associated with that and the development work, we will do our best to either reschedule it if he's not able to join us in the next 30 minutes or so. We'll try and reschedule it for later in the session, or do a separate event around that next year. In which case, in the meantime, I think we shall have a few questions. Because your papers both aligned really, really well, obviously, because we designed the program that way. So I guess from our side, one of the things that's been really important, that's why I was really excited when I got both of your presentations and was building the program, is over the next year, one of the areas that Form is really focusing on around our resources, our resource guidelines development, but also our community development activities, all of the workshops that we're doing next year, is around investing in open source infrastructures and working out how the region can participate, but also how sometimes the region can also contribute in other ways, because a lot of these infrastructures, what we find is not all of them are compatible with right to left, which means they don't always support the Arabic language. Some of them have real trouble with the Arabic fonts. It's something that's on our sort of not to-do list that we're going to do anything about it, but sort of very much around our sort of program of areas that we want to work with organizations, global organizations, more to help and pull together relevant working groups. And we're working very closely with SCOS next year on a program of events around, investing in openness. So for me, myself, I have a sort of a kickoff question and lovely audience. I can see quite a lot of you there. So please do use this time wisely to throw in your own questions as well. But what can the region do? We're a very financially fragmented, geographically fragmented, and also sort of circumstantially fragmented region, perhaps more so than somewhere like Europe or North America, which is more consolidated. So what can we do in different ways to either invest or to support in ways that are perhaps non-financial? Quite a broad question. So
Go ahead, Sarah.
I think Emily, your point about language support is I think is a really good example of one way that the region can contribute. Multilingualism is something that a lot of infrastructures are talking about, and Diamond Open Access initiatives are talking about the importance of multilingualism, being able to support research in global languages to be able to support search and discovery in global languages, and to broaden that. And I think one of the needs is just surfacing the expertise and the regional and local perspectives that are needed to implement those kind of to technically implement and to coordinate and promote features and programs that are relevant around the world. So part of it is participating in the communities that you that are important to your work. So whether it's financial, whether it's committing a little bit of time to participating in something like one of these PKP development sprints, or in other kinds of user research or user feedback opportunities, working groups, maybe even developing regional or country-specific working groups that can contribute roadmaps and kind of planning, helping infrastructures understand what they can do to better serve research communities around the world.
Thank you. That's a really interesting response. I'm also frantically making notes because this will help. As I said, it was quite a selfish question, so it's going to help our roadmap of events for next year. John, do you have anything to add to this?
I would say, first of all, on the language issue, I'm delighted that we've had opportunities to work with Arabic as a language, and members of the community who've helped us, I wouldn't say perfect, but have helped us implement the right to left and the use of Arabic fonts and characters. And we've worked very hard on accessibility in terms of international languages, fonts that can work internationally across languages. So I'd be happy if people held up OJS as an example, and that we could share some of the technology if it comes up in terms of our ability to make the platform versatile in terms of the language. And I would also encourage the local development. So this archipelago concept that every library in the area, in the Middle East and North Africa, is a potential site for mounting OJS. That's all it takes. If your library has a computer, if it's connected to the internet, then you can begin to experiment. And we often find, for example, student journals being a very strong way of starting in a community. There's very low risk, as it were, and very low cost in terms of installing the software, and inviting students to start publishing. And having the opportunity to experience open access, the publishing process, and begin to build, and reviewing, very, very important, learning about peer review and editing responsibilities. And so building the local culture, and not just assuming it's a financial aspect, it's in fact a capacity building aspect that can start with the enthusiasm of students. We've had a great deal of actually it's very interesting, it's almost cultural. There are places I work in the Netherlands, almost no student journals, and at Stanford we have a dozen. And so I think it takes a kind of mindset to think that students can publish. But I think in terms of the Middle East and North Africa, I think it's a way of building and starting locally a culture of research and review.
Thank you. And I find that really, really interesting for various reasons. One, we publish Arab language journals, and we're about to publish our first Arab language book. So I can vouch if anyone here in the region wants to publish in Arabic. The system works great for Arabic. We find it hugely useful, and it definitely works. So that works. But also, as John, I was emailing your colleagues this morning. We've actually had a number of inquiries over the last few weeks asking for workshops to be run next year as part of our CDA program, specifically on setting up journals in OJS. So I did actually reach out this morning asking if that's something that we could.
And we even have special workshops on student journals.
Even better. I mean, we very much want to. I've actually made a note of that. So thank you. So in the meantime, once again, everyone, I can see that there's almost 100 of you, and I'm hoping you're all full of burning questions and desperately want to add them into the Q&A. But in the meantime, we have some already, and I just want to start with them. So a question for Sarah specifically: are there frameworks that you recommend as invest in open infrastructure that measure the true cost and return on investment for open access publishing?
This is a really good question, and it is something that we have looked into as part of this National Science Foundation funded project that sponsored some of the work that that I reported on. I'll put a link in the chat to another part of that work that we did, which is a report on the cost and price of public access to scholarly publications. So this report has information that we've collected around the cost, that is, what is it actually, what are the various costs that go into producing an open access journal article, for example, and the price, what are publishers charging generally to publish that? What are APC charges, for example? So we've collected some of that information from various studies that have examined what are the costs, what goes into actually producing a journal article, and what are the article processing charges. So that can help give some idea of some of those things. One particular resource for those considering open access publishing and what are the costs of becoming an institutional or a library-based open access publisher is this Open Access Journals Toolkit, which helps to inventory some of the specific costs that go into publishing, whether that's DOI registration, coordinating peer review, all of those. It kind of helps future journal editors or publishers think about what actually goes into those costs. So we have some idea of what those costs look like. The magnitude of those costs has always been really difficult to pin down. There have been various studies that look at, can we actually put a number on those components? And it's just so highly variable that isn't something that we have a good grasp of, based on what IOI's research has shown. And similarly, the return on investment question, I think, is so important, but is also something that's really difficult to pin down. We know that there is billions of dollars in investment in the commercial publishing system, in subscriptions, in article processing charges distributed across institutions around the world. So, we have to imagine that the scale is huge in terms of return on investment in implementing relatively low cost infrastructures like PKP, like institutional repositories, to facilitate this access compared to commercial publishing, which we know to be significantly more expensive and resource intensive.
Thank you. Yeah, I think taking off my former hat from it and putting on the publishing hat, it is something the ROI is so important and so difficult for us to sort of calibrate. We work on an hour basis to share for everyone to make it easy for people to understand the investment and ensure that transparency. But yeah, it is a tricky one. John, do you have anything to add to this before we move on to the next question?
No, I'm fascinated, Sarah, by where you find the difficulty, where it becomes difficult to pin down the costs, and where you can speak with more confidence. I think that's an interesting aspect. We're not represented. I mean, we're a special organization that has developed over 28 years, and so I wouldn't want to generalize from any of our costs in terms of how we provide. But I think what someone asked what we meant by hidden costs in the column. I thought that was an interesting question. And I think it is, again, I'm emphasizing the unrealized costs, the not fully comprehended. And I think it's the global complexity of the economics that we're providing. And really the group that we're discussing here, the Diamond Open Access without charges to authors, the non-commercial is a good way to think about it, aspect is an economy just as complex as the commercial sector, with fewer zeros, as it were, in terms of the numbers at the end of the numbers. But there is still an intricacy of support. And I think we all, peer review is a very good example of a very strong distributed cost that doesn't show up anywhere. And I think that needs to be recognized, that the community in the Middle East and North Africa are involved as academics. The scholars that certainly are involved in reviewing. And as I said before, that's an important culture to build. But it's not a hidden cost. It is an integral cost of doing scholarship.
Sarah, do you have anything to add?
Sure, I'll chime in on the question of what do we mean by hidden costs in the context of public access policies. The policies that we looked at, many of them are quite vague on how public access is to be achieved. The U.S. policy, the Nelson memo, doesn't specify that preprints need to be deposited in a particular repository, or that an APC model is what they're encouraging. It doesn't specify what actually what is the mechanism of public access? How will people get access to this research that's been publicly funded? And I think that means that there is a diversity of models. It may look like APC, your grant covering APC charges. It may look like direct investment in open repositories or in open publishing systems in other. That's more common in other regions than in the US, for example. But it may look like institutions picking up the slack and covering APCs, or providing repositories or open publishing platforms or infrastructure or other ways of making this happen. And so those hidden costs are the ones that aren't directly addressed by the policies. There's I think, again, especially in the US, there's maybe an assumption or a hidden assumption built into the policy that the APC model has become very common, a common way, as has green open access, so depositing a version of the article into a repository. But these policies don't explicitly address the cost of maintaining infrastructure, all of the components in this system that help keep things running, whether that's persistent identifier systems or digital preservation systems, or the repository frameworks that are used to build institutional repositories. And they also don't take into account the human costs, what needs to happen within an institution to ensure that researchers are aware of these policies, that researchers know what options are available to them and can take advantage of those options, that the university feels confident that researchers are actually complying with the policy and that their funding isn't in danger. There's this range of unacknowledged costs that end up needing to be absorbed somewhere, whether it's by the individual researcher, the institution, the specific government agency that's issuing the grant. But those aren't typically specifically or explicitly addressed in these policies, and you're not kind of given a budget for your contribution to open infrastructure, your increased overhead costs for the institution to help address these new requirements that are being imposed, or even necessarily for APCs, although some agencies in the US, like the National Institutes of Health, are specifically considering this question of, do we need a specific cap on what we cover for APCs specifically? But there's this whole range of things that we need to consider how to fund and cover most effectively, most efficiently for the funders, so that their funding is not being wasted, not being duplicated, and also to make it easiest for researchers to comply with these policies.
Thank you. And just to say, for this region, and for those of you that are interested, I'll be giving a presentation about it tomorrow. It's this region we've been mapping the open access landscape, and actually, I wouldn't say the lion's share, but a clear majority, about 53% of the whole region's open access journal portfolio is Diamond. And that's really nice for us to see, because what we see is the majority of those journals are owned by universities and then funders. Publishers only own about 212 or so journals across the whole region that we've mapped. And of those Diamond journals, talking about who's investing and everything else, what's nice is that the universities without national mandates have very much said, these are assets, in the same way that in America, a football stadium is an asset in the return, build your prestige and you're going to invest in that and get an expensive coach and all these things. The universities here have said, actually, these are our assets, these are the jewels in our crown, and this is what we're going to invest in. We're not looking, they're not revenue generation vehicles, they are prestige vehicles. They're showcases for our research, for the region, for the world, and we're really going to invest in that. And they've just set aside that small proportion of money each year, whether it's to get publishing support around the DOIs or the HTML that they can't do, or to build up their internal teams. And it's something that it's very exciting for us to see, and it's something that we're very happy about, particularly the sort of the multilingualism associated with that. But obviously not every university does that. Even when they do that, there's the balance that a lot of them are saying, oh, we've got these journals, but they're not in Scopus. You, oh, faculty must still publish in Scopus, which obviously causes a bit of an issue, and we're still looking at that and how to support. But we have another question, Sarah. It's semi for you, but I think actually it would apply usefully to both of you. So um, says, I think the use of open infrastructure also depends a lot on how faculty and researchers relate to it. Even when such infrastructure, like institutional repositories, is available, faculty trust and engagement, especially in Africa, remain very low. And this often stems from issues such as copyright concerns, plagiarism fears, and other related challenges. In both of your views, what do you think is the critical factor behind this low engagement, specifically in Africa, but I imagine it also happens in other regions as well? And what is the possible way forward? Who wants to go first?
Do you have a thought?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first on this one, because it is a big concern for us. And I mentioned earlier, and I just put a link into the webinar chat. So the question of trust is a very important one, and the question of indexing that Emily, you raised just a moment ago, and on the Scopus and aspect in the Web of Science, another example, is a major responsibility. And part of the success of open access has been to get so far ahead of the indexing systems and services. So let me start with the trust factor. I think the question we have taken for granted is that everybody knows the right journals, and that there's just a small community of trusted journals, and your advisor can let you know. And now that we have a world of open access that the public has access to, and now we have global participation, we can't rely on that anymore. We need to be much more explicit about what distinguishes research and journals from other forms of information in an age of misinformation. So the response from at the Public Knowledge Project has been for the last 4 years to develop what we're calling the publication facts label, that will give for every article the number of reviewers, the days to publication, a link to the conflict of interest statement, a link to the data availability statement, to the editorial team, and we'll share and the funding sources in a standard format, just as you find on food products. In fact, we've been very inspired by the nutrition facts on food products, and have been inspired by the research that shows the public uses and trusts these labels on food. And I think we need to do the same now with research articles, because it's very difficult to determine if an article's had peer review. Now, can you trust the label? And this is part of the work that we've done at the platform level, to make sure that the label is generated automatically from within the platform, so that no one tampers with the data. Now, it's not hack-proof. I wish I could develop a hack-proof piece of software, and then I would be famous forever. But it's definitely basically secure, and it definitely raises the bar for integrity. So if those of you in North Africa and the Middle East have a journal using OJS at this point, the label, the publication facts label, and if you scroll up to my name on the chat, at what time did I put that in?
About 20 minutes ago, 20 or 30
Yeah,
minutes ago.
here it is, 1:28. At 1:28, if you scroll up to 1:28 a.m. for me, um, you can feel some sympathy, but you can also see the link that takes you to an explanation of the label. What's interesting for us has been that there's industry interest in this. So it's OJS right now for the label. It's a plugin that you install in OJS. But we've had 30 industry reps, including Elsevier and including Scholar One, that are interested in exploring this publication facts label as an industry-wide standard. Because really, trust labels like this need complete participation to build trust. But it would also level the playing field. If the same label that is used by Elsevier, as it were, is used by your journal locally, then you already have, as it were, a step in or a foot in that you wouldn't have otherwise. And it will also help for indexing. It will build trust among the indexers. So DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, has been the first to endorse the label as a way of helping them decide what journals can go into DOAJ. And this indexing issue is something at OJS, at PKP rather, we're investigating. We see part of it as our responsibility. Can we improve the metadata for the indexers? And part of it is to exhort and cajole the indexers to be more responsible for global coverage. And we now have open indexes like OpenAlex that we're working with very closely to improve the indexing level. We've worked with Google Scholar since 2004, so 20 odd years of gaining indexing on multiple languages. When we discovered there were 60 languages being used by OJS, we had a discussion with Google Scholar, and two things happened. One is they pointed out we missed a language in our own list. And the other is that they picked up 2 or 3 languages that they weren't indexing previously for scholarship, that they're now indexing. So this is an ongoing issue, and investing in open infrastructure, one thing needs to be invested in is the quality of indexing, which relates to the quality of metadata and relates to the responsibilities of the indexers.
Thank you. I think, I mean, the trust thing is so important. It's something as a publisher, and we basically, again, wearing my knowledge hat for a minute, supporting diamond journals in the Global South. It's something we're coming up with increasingly now as the rise of predators come. Indexers automatically look at an awful lot of journals, even legitimate, very good journals within not just our region, but we work with Central Asia, we work with Latin America, we work with Indonesia a lot, actually, as you pulled it up, but a lot of countries across the Global South. And it's something that we are seeing increasingly is not so much the DOAJ, because obviously they're very proactive around inclusion of Global South text, but certainly with some of the Global North indexes, increasingly the journals we support, the moment they apply, everyone looks at them like they must be suspicious, they must be low quality, they must be predatory, purely because of their location or because of the nationality of the authors or anything else like that. And it's something we're starting to push back, and it's something both as form and as knowledge we're really trying to address. But it is definitely a huge concern. So thank you. As I've seen someone else in the chat has already said, thank you for creating this useful tool.
I'd be happy to share the label just for a moment, since we have this extra time.
Yeah, please. I think it'd be very interesting. While you're sharing, just to say as well, in case anyone's interested, so we run a survey every year around open access. It's been something we've been doing for about 6 years now. And what's really interesting is the first 2 or 3 years, everyone assumed open access was automatically equated, certainly for this region, with predatory practices and low quality. And interestingly, over the last 3 to 4 years, there's been a real change, and now that's no longer a factor. I mean, it's still a little bit, but instead of being sort of 60% or 80%, it's now dropped to sort of 10 to 15% of people have those concerns. So I think at least while individual journals trust is an issue, while specific countries are perhaps viewed as untrustworthy with regards to research integrity, and that's still an issue, the overall, at least as a positive outlook, that open access itself is no longer viewed as inherently untrustworthy, despite the huge growth in predators in recent years. So that's nice. Sorry, John, back to you for the publication facts.
Oh, just say that. So this label will appear on the article landing page for every article. And so it speaks immediately to the predatory journal question, not just the peer reviewers, but the days to publication and the acceptance rate. And again, this is all data taken directly from the platform rather than entered by the publisher or the editor, with the proviso that it could be hacked, but it couldn't be easily hacked. So just and again, this is just being released now for OJS versions, getting a little technical, but versions 3.3, 3.4, and 3.5. And there's information on the Public Knowledge Project. I can provide a link in there, but thank you very much for a chance to share.
I think that's very, very interesting. But also I think what both of you have just sort of stepping back and while people wait and see if they have any more questions, one of the things I think that both of you have really highlighted, and I think it's one of the most important things around this whole discussion, and it is a very, very large discussion, is that it's not a single product. It's not a single product, it's not a single solution, it's not a single demographic. The responsibility sits with no one. The authority and credibility sits with no one, and the money sits with no one. It is, we all have to do everything. But also, John, as you said, suddenly you're doing something around publication facts, and then you're reaching out to Google Scholar, and they've realized that there's a whole demographic that sidelining and marginalizing, a whole community of knowledge that's being ignored, and then they're coming back to you and highlighting that there's an area that you ignored and everything else. And I think that's very important. It's important for the academic ecosystem and scholarly communications in general. It's a spider's web. It's a very holistic and sort of symbiotic relationship that we're all involved in, whether we want to be or not. But also I think it's particularly important for open science, and I think that's something both of you have really highlighted, is that the success of the open science movement in general, of open access within that, of all of the sort of competing bits, whether it's repositories or data or PIDs or everything, it's so interconnected, and everything is so integral for everything else. So we really do have to pay attention to it all and fund it all. You can't just only fund one bit and hope the whole system works. Do we have any other questions, or does anyone have anything? Sarah, John, do either of you have anything else you'd like to add at this stage?
I'll chime in briefly on the question of participation in open repositories and other research infrastructures, and the barriers to that, and why participation may be low. I think this is an issue. I think this is a global issue, although I'm interested to hear that it maybe is especially pronounced in Africa in this delegate's experience. I think I'll go back to this pyramid that I showed in my slides of all of the, again, emphasizing the interconnectedness of all of these things, that making the infrastructure available is the first step. It is foundational. That infrastructure needs to be there, and as we've been talking about, it needs to be funded. And it is this interrelated, interreliant ecosystem of things that need to be funded and supported and in place to enable participation. That's the foundation. But there are all these layers on top of that, and that come between infrastructure and the policy compliance and telling researchers that this is something that's required of them. And I think that's where a lot of things break down and have broken, that we see in researcher participation in open data deposit, for example, globally, since especially I think that's the kind of a new emerging thing that researchers are still getting used to, and still very much globally we see some of these same concerns that you're referencing around concerns about people reusing data in irresponsible ways, or plagiarism or scooping. Those kinds of concerns come up a lot around data. So again, I think it's it's those intermediary steps between infrastructure and policy or requirements that are really important to get right. So that's making it easy for researchers to engage with that infrastructure. So not just making it available, but making it fit within their workflow. It's making it normative within their discipline, working with communities, disciplinary communities, research communities, so that people see their peers participating, and some of those concerns get get a little bit smoothed over when they see other people doing this with positive results, or not seeing those negative effects that they might be concerned about. It's making available the resources that that we've seen. Spark in the US has been a really influential organization in helping to give authors, researchers, the tools they need to retain their rights, so that they're not worried about these copyright issues and things like that. We see that same language being used in some public access policies like Plan S, and others that, again, explicitly addresses some of these concerns and makes it clear and gives authors the language and the standing that they need in order to allay concerns like that. So again, making it normative, making it feel more accessible and less risky for researchers.
Thank you. John, anything to add?
No, I think I.
In that case, because we might finish a little early because we were obviously one speaker down, but I think actually it's allowed us to have a much more in-depth conversation about these hidden costs. And thank you to our attendees. As I said, quite a lot of you have turned up and engaged, and thank you for the nice things you've said. My colleague Jasir has put a survey in the Slack channel, and he'll add it again. Please do, if you have time, do fill in the survey. I know you get asked to fill in a lot of surveys, and I know it's a massive pain, but we really do use this to help build our programs for the coming year. So it's very helpful for us about what we want to put on from capacity building for you. It helps us choose key themes for the following year's annual forum. So it's very useful information. We do like to have that from you. You are part of the community, and we want to make sure that we provide things that you as the community will actually find valuable. So please do that. And Sarah and John, I can't thank you enough for not only John turning up in the middle of the night, but also for extending the Q&A and really sharing so much information. We really appreciate this, and you will have a certificate of appreciation in the email with a tree. We planted a mangrove tree for each of you as a thank you here in the UAE. I can't remember the exact carbon thing, but it's something like 350 tons of carbon over the next year. So thank you very much. And yeah, thank you again. And for those of you who are joining us for the next sessions, I believe we'll be having a lunch break now, but then there'll be 2 more parallel sessions after lunch. There's one of them is a round table. It will be in Arabic. So I'm afraid we won't provide translation for that straight away. That'll be coming later. It's a roundtable about the open science communities in the region. And then we have another English language panel as well. So thank you again for all of you attending, and thank you again to our lovely speakers. I will clap because I'm the only one here, but everyone else, if you want to say nice things to our speakers, please also do just drop them in the chat.
Thanks so much, Emily. Thanks, everyone.
And John,
Thank you.
Please go to bed like it's the middle of the night.
Already started. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye. Good to see you, Sarah. Nice.
You too, John.